Julie, if you'd like to take a seat here. Can I just introduce the other members of our panel for this session? So sitting next to Julie is Sarah Hutchinson. She's the Managing Director International of the BARBRI Group. Now, the BARBRI Group is a company headquartered in Dallas, Texas, whose primary product offering is a bar exam preparation course. So well qualified to be on our panel. And next to Sarah is Toby Seddon, who many of you, I'm sure, will know, Professor of Criminology and Head of the School of Law at the University of Manchester. What I'd like to begin by doing is asking you both, very briefly, a couple of minutes, really just a couple of minutes, to respond to what you've just heard from Julie.
Thank you, Clive. Just to give my perspective, first of all, I'm not only involved in training people to take the US bar exams, which is my current job. I was very heavily involved in the College of Law, the University of Law. I was the Vice President, so I know both the UK and the US systems. I very much welcome the move to a centralised pre-admission exam. And the reason is standards, the ability to drive up standards, the ability to create consistency of standards. I've seen far too many examples over 20 years of very differing exam standards creeping in, not deliberately. There's been no attempt to manipulate exam results. It's just if you have a multitude of providers offering different exams, it is impossible for any organisation, even the SRE, to create consistency. So I welcome the introduction. Just a couple of issues from the point of view of what else is good. I really like the integration of the academic, professional and practice competencies, so that we're assessing at every level that not only does a student know the law, but that they can put it into practice and they get the ethical issues underpinning that. And I think that's a great introduction. At the moment, the system is far too siloed. Academic first, professional second, and practice third. So I think that's a great thing. And I think finally, from the student's perspective, pathways is critical. Students like certainty. If we're going to continue to attract the most talented and the most committed individuals to our profession, we have got to give them certainty. They will not go into an environment where they don't know what they're getting at the end of it, where they don't know what they need to do. That's what students generally say, what do I have to do? Okay. So that's my perspective.
Right. Okay, so it's going to be good for students, it's going to drive up standards, it's going to be good in terms of pathways. Toby, what do you think?
Well, I think it's fair to say that for university law schools, these proposals are an enormous challenge. The law schools have built their programs and curricula for decades around the model of the qualifying law degree. So with that being proposed to disappear and be replaced by a very different system, you can imagine that amongst my counterparts in university law schools, there is considerable consternation about some of these proposals. But of course,
if it's going to drive up standards, if it's going to be good for students, are those concerns ones that should be just put to one side, addressed in the general cause of improving things?
Well, yes, I would certainly agree with that, Clive. And I think, yes, there is a big challenge for us, but there are also lots of opportunities to do some new things with our law programs. So we're at University of Manchester, we're taking this opportunity to really rethink what we're doing with our curricula on our law programs. So of course our bread and butter is academically rigorous, intellectually stimulating programs, and we will continue to do that, but we're also thinking about what actually are the skills, the qualities, the experience that graduates need these days to succeed, whether that's in the legal sector or any other sector. So we're really having a root and branch review of what is on our law programs and seeking to align what we're doing with the new proposals for qualification. So for us, this is actually really exciting, and we're embracing change.
Great, okay, so it's exciting, it's challenging. Let's go to law firms now. This is your opportunity to have your say. So if you have a question, please do put your hand up, and one of our fleet-footed questioners will find you. I don't see any hands at the moment. We'll take your time, because you know, it's a big thing to ask a question in a hall this large with this many people. So on your behalf, let me ask our panel a couple of things. Oh, we do. I'm so sorry. We had one over there. I missed you. Sir, could you just tell us who you are, first of all, and where you're from?
David Smith from Anthony Gold Solicitors. Ms. Brannan, you said that this is going to reduce cost, but why? How is this going to reduce cost? There's still 2 exams. Surely most of the main providers will simply shift their business into providing chargeable and probably quite highly priced courses to meet the 2 SQEs.
So I think 2 answers to that. First of all, if universities use this to integrate what at the moment is the professional stage of training into their law degrees, that means that the LPC goes. And so the cost, which can be up to £15,000, is absorbed into the cost of a law degree, and also the PSC goes, the professional skills course. So there's a potential cost saving there of £16,500. But even for those universities who don't do that, we think that injecting greater competition into the legal training market creates pressures which will drive costs down. We have seen no evidence of competitive pressures at the moment in the LPC market. Price has just continued to increase inexorably since the LPC was introduced in 1993. So I don't know if you've got any perspectives from the American point of view.
Certainly. I mean, certainly from the American perspective, there is an economy of scale in the American market. There are 28,000 bar review sitters every year, so that it's a bigger market. But even so, the costs of qualifying in the US roughly come in at about $5,000 per postgraduate student. Now, of course, a lot of their training is done at postgraduate level, so they're already carrying significant costs. But my organisation charges $3,000 for a bar preparation course. Where the difference lies in a bar preparation course, which would be SQE1 prep or SQE2 prep, is that you're not prescribing the input that has to go into that programme. So, for example, in an LPC or a bar course, there is an awful lot of prescription. You have to have this number of computers, you have to have this number of books, you have to have this number of staff. Once that goes, then commercially, you can start to look at ways of creating a bar preparation course that is very much more cost effective, particularly through the use of technology. So my view, looking at, you know, from my old College of Law hat on and looking at comparing it with the American organisation now, is that there will be inevitably more competition in the market, and inevitably I think that will force a review of cost, hopefully in the right direction.
Toby, let me ask you, because social mobility, diversity is at the core of a lot of the thinking around this. What's your view as to how this proposed examination will affect those issues?
Well, it's certainly something that the University of Manchester as a whole takes great pride in, our work on widening participation and access to higher education. So anything that was going to restrict that will be of great concern. I think the key issue will be whether there are flexible pathways into the profession through, not all universities are going to do the same thing in response to this, but if there are pathways that are less expensive, that can open up access, then that would be something we would really support. But that's only likely to come if there is flexibility, in my view.
Okay. Any other questions from the floor? Yes, the lady down in the front row here. Again, could you just tell us who you are and your question?
Yes, my name's Linda Lee. I have to say I support the idea of a central assessment. My only slight concern is removing the requirement to do contentious and non-contentious both, because I think it protects people at a very early stage of their career, not least from themselves. They may have a vision of what they want to do but not be sure. And I think it's important they do both elements. And I also think it's important, even if they're going on to be a litigator, that they've had that grounding, that background in the non-contentious elements. So that's the only thing that really troubles me. Yeah,
good point. Anyway, I'm going to ask Julie to address that one.
Yes, it is a shift, and it's something that we've thought very, very carefully about. I think what we're trying to do is reflect the reality of practice, that actually once people have qualified as a solicitor, they qualify really either as a contentious solicitor or as a non-contentious solicitor, and it's very rare for people really to flip back and forth between those. Oddly enough, I was looking recently at something called the Trainee Litigation Programme, which is something which was introduced by the Law Society in about 2003, and it's a course which is available to firms who haven't got enough contentious work within the firms to train their trainees and give them the experience in a law firm, give them their contentious experience. And so it's just a week in, I think the University of Law runs it, a week at the University of Law and a week in a law clinic. And that really is really stretching our regulations really to their very extreme. I think we've probably already sold the pass on that one, actually, through that.
Very briefly, can I ask you, do you regard the contentious and non-contentious learning as being a critical part of the armoury and the perspective of a good solicitor?
I think the evidence is against us on that one, because I think in reality most solicitors have qualified in environments where their experience in practice, if you look at the training contracts that are available in the market right now, they're fairly limited, they're fairly narrow anyway. So the reality is that most of us have qualified with relatively limited practice areas. You know, you could start to raise the same issues around magic circle firms who carry 50% of all trainees are going through the top 100 firms. And those firms have got a very narrow area. I'm not necessarily saying it's good or bad. I'm simply saying in reality that ship has sailed, in my view.
Sure. Toby, a quick view on that.
Well, at our end of the process, our job is really to ensure that our students have options kept open, so they need experience of across the board, really. So our job is to give them a taste of as many things as possible and allow them to make their own choices rather than to narrow too early.
Okay. All right. More questions, please. Yes, the first hand I saw was the gentleman in the 1, 2, 3, third row. Can we get a microphone, or maybe if you've just got a loud voice, you can stand up and shout.
My name's Mark Appleyard. I'm interested in the university end of this. If I understood things correctly, you're effectively suggesting that what is typically a law degree will now change to incorporate kind of the early bit that's normally done post-graduation. If that's tailored towards people who want to qualify as a solicitor, it makes it difficult for A-level students to say, well, do I want to go on that course? Because I think I want to be a lawyer, but I might want to be a barrister. Or, you know, there are other types of lawyers that are available, apparently.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. I think we get the point.
And it seems to be that you're actually forcing people to decide at 18 what type of lawyer they want to be. I certainly I knew I wanted to be a lawyer when I was 18, but I had no idea whether it was going to be to the bar or
very
solicitor.
good point. Okay, you're driving people too early to make career decisions.
So I think, first of all, an SQE ready degree, if I can call it that, would actually meet the BSB requirements set out in the consultation that they've just published. So I think actually you could do a degree that got you ready for the SQE and actually go on to qualify as a barrister as well. So you wouldn't have to make that choice. And I think it is an interesting thing to think about how universities will take this on board. There are lots of different options that universities could choose. They could, for example, have a very sort of common approach for the first couple of years that was very generic, and then they could choose in their third year to offer courses for people who were intending to practice as solicitors and those who had other career aspirations. So I think a lot of this depends on the sorts of degrees and the imagination of universities. I don't know, Toby, if you've got
It's a really good question, because it's one of the questions we're grappling with at the moment, and it's actually even more challenging because not all of our graduates who do law degrees want to become lawyers or certainly become lawyers. In fact, it's about 60% do and 40% don't. So our challenge is not just the one you put, but also to design a programme that has transferable skills that are relevant and useful in a range of sectors. So it is actually quite a complicated task to do that, but that's the challenge.
I also think that you need to be wary. Toby's university is at the very edges of adoption, of the early stages of adoption, of looking at SQE. I spend a lot of time on campuses, and there are large numbers of universities who are simply not even thinking about this stuff yet. So I think you have to be realistic that not all universities will respond as Toby's do.
And I think just to add one thing to what Toby was saying, the sorts of skills that we are assessing in the SQE, that we would be assessing, that are set out in the solicitor's competence statement, actually are relevant. You know, communication skills, analysis, they're relevant for practice as a solicitor, but they're relevant actually for those of Toby's students who go off to work in management, to be accountants, whatever they do. They're really core generic professional competencies.
Okay. More questions. I'm interested to know from you people here whether you welcome this, whether you think you can have more confidence in this single exam, that there will be more consistency in the level of students or the level of trainees that you're going to take on in your firms, whether you think it's going to drive up standards, whether you think perhaps things are a little bit patchy at the moment and it's difficult for you to make the right choices. Do people... let's have a quick show of hands on that actually. Who generally speaking, who welcomes this idea? We know there's much to work out, but one hand went up there. Okay, no, so let's have a show of hands, proper show of hands. Who welcomes the idea? Okay, maybe about 20% of the audience. Okay, all right. On that question, the lady wearing the orange top had her hand up. Yeah.
My name's Nova Bradley. We run a firm in Oxfordshire, a very small firm. And we've had a number of staff who've trained through and are training through Silex. So I'm quite switched on to the sort of changes that Silex has gone through. And I'm just wondering, and this gives me some sort of parallels with that. Obviously, it's not exactly the same. And I just wondered if you could comment upon that.
Yeah. Are you sort of aping the Silex model to a degree?
So, not really. I mean, I think what we do think is that this would still provide a mechanism for, and we would welcome very much Silex candidates qualifying through this process. So we do think that this would enable Silex candidates to continue to join the profession, qualify as solicitors and take the Solicitors Qualifying Exam.
But presumably they would have to take a second exam, which they don't currently have to do if they go through the full process.
So what they have to do at the moment is they have to take the LPC. So Silex people at the moment have to pay that full £15,000 to take the LPC. They wouldn't have to do that anymore, but they would have to take the, if they didn't have full practice rights, certainly they would have to take the SQE.
Okay. I want to get as many questions as possible. I see a gentleman at the back with his hand up and a piece of paper. A popular choice of questioner, clearly.
Thank you. My name's Chris Clark. I run both a solicitor's practice and an advocacy chambers. It's a question really for Julie. One of the big problems under the current training contracts has been the robust monitoring or not of the actual experience that's provided. Can you tell me, please, what the arrangements will be in relation to that to make sure that appropriate training is given? Thank you.
So again, what we would like to do is to monitor this through data. So we would publish data about people's, the performance of individual candidates from particular law firms. And again, this is something that we've talked to the Junior Lawyers Division about, and they really welcome that sort of approach, that sort of transparency that would give aspiring solicitors information about where were really good places to go and train.
Okay. Anyone else on that? Who in the hall, again, has concerns about the monitoring? Who shares those concerns? Okay, a couple of hands going up, well, more than a couple. Okay, all right, one more question, I think, probably. The gentleman at the back, yeah, standing, thank you.
It's about the integration of certain courses into the LLB degrees, which I think we would have concerns because I've actually texted my trainee and some junior staff who have just completed LLB. So would that actually create an elite sort of LLB degrees amongst the universities in the UK? I think that, Magic Circle Firms has already created their own LBC with certain LBC providers, but actually would this actually create more division within the profession?
Yeah. Julie. Okay, that's a really important issue, isn't it? I mean, is this going to be more divisive? Is it going to be, more iniquitous?
So I think what it's going to do is going to create more choice, and it's going to enable people to be much clearer about what they are getting when they're looking at which university to go to study law. At the moment, They don't know whether they're going to, or they think they're going to university to study law. Most people who go to university to study law, not surprisingly, do so because they think they're going to be lawyers. And the data is that at point of entry to universities, the overwhelming majority of people think they're going to qualify as solicitors or as barristers. There's lack of transparency about what it is that they're going to be taught. And at the end of their law degree, we say to them, well, actually, you've got to go and spend another £15,000 to learn what it really takes to be a lawyer. So what I hope is that this encourages universities to be a lot clearer about what the purpose is of their law degree and the training that they are offering their students. And that transparency, that clarity, I think is a great benefit to students.
Okay, so no is the answer. It's not going to be more divisive, it's going to be less divisive.
There's going to be more choice, but more clarity about the choices available to students.
Any other views?
My view is that it's slightly naive to imagine that there isn't a select group of universities from whom the Magic Circle are recruiting anyway. So frankly, I think that's a bit of a non-issue, to be absolutely frank with you. I think that I also question, why should every law degree be the same? The profession is not the same. The profession doesn't do the same job. So why on earth should every preparation programme to be the same? I think choice is a good thing.
Okay.
Just briefly, I mean, obviously, from my perspective, our core mission is education, not anything else. But in a context where students accrue enormous levels of debt in acquiring their degrees these days, we have an absolute moral responsibility to make sure that they get good value out of their degrees and that we at least think about how we can help people get into the futures that they want. It would be wrong for us to just ignore all of that and say, once you're out of our doors, off you go, it's up to you. We've got to think about it. We've got to engage with the agenda.
Okay, let's have one last question, and I'm going to ask for a two-sentence answer from each of our panel. Yes, gentleman there, that's the first one I saw, with the red scarf. Let's just get the mic to you, just so that everyone gets the question.
Yeah, Vincent Onebu is the name. I just wanted to know to what extent the new regime is going to push up the quality of solicitor advocacy.
So solicitor advocates, well, we would include advocacy, as you saw, as part of the SQE2 assessment. So again, everybody would have to take an advocacy assessment. They would have to be able to demonstrate that they could advocate on behalf of their clients, either in a contentious or a non-contentious context. At the moment, advocacy is assessed on the LPC. Often they're very, very simple assessments. So this would be set at a higher level of difficulty. It would be this, the level of difficulty that we would expect of somebody at point of qualification. They would have to demonstrate that they could go, they were being assessed in a contentious context, they could go into court and they could advocate, they could make a submission on behalf of their client.
Okay, good. Slightly more than two sentences, but a good answer. Okay, so there's going to be higher quality training, yes, and the bar will be set higher, yes, in terms of the tasks that they're given. Okay, yeah, Sarah.
The biggest challenge I see in all of this for the SRA is that in order to meet all of the interest groups, the SRA are proposing quite a complex set of assessments and quite a lot of those assessments. If you compare the SQE 1 and 2 with the, have I gone off mic? No. If you compare it with for example, the New York Bar, there are a lot more exams in the SQE 1 and 2. Now, if you then compare that, if you then consider that in the context of the cost issue and the drive to reduce that cost to the consumer, to the student and to the law firms, that's quite challenging to get the quality of the assessment high and with a very wide range of assessments. That's going to be the challenge, and I'd watch that with interest. I think that's the biggest challenge for the SRA. How do you get that number of assessments at a high enough standard, yeah, so that you do improve standards? Yeah,
there certainly are a very rigorous set of assessments. These assessments will be tough. There's no question about that. We think that the large numbers of people coming through that will enable us to offer these assessments at cost-effective prices, particularly SQE1. We expect there would be large numbers taking those assessments, and that would create economies of scale.
So to people who are concerned that actually this kind of one-size-fits-all is going to amount to a dumbing down, and now I've heard those concerns expressed. What do you say?
Absolutely, that this is a tough assessment. We've benchmarked it domestically, we've benchmarked it internationally, and the consensus is that this is a tough, rigorous, hard test.
But the SRA will outsource it.
Yeah.
And setting those high standards and maintaining high standards on a lot of assessments at a low cost, I can tell you from the University of Law's perspective, that would have been a tough call. So I'm just trying to note of realism.
And outsourcing it to a single examiner.
Yes.
So to ensure consistency.
Absolutely, a single assessment body, but of course involved in setting those standards and setting the assessments, we would involve experts, and experts are practitioners, so practitioners would be at the heart of setting that standard, of being clear what the standard is that's required for safe practice at point of qualification.
Okay. We're all but out of time for this session. Have you got a very, very quick point?
Half a sentence, just in response to the gentleman's question about advocacy. In fact, I mean, we're relatively unusual, I think, but we already have a course on advocacy in our undergraduate programme, and we're not the only law school that does. So some of this stuff is already being done, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, sadly we're out of time, but please continue this conversation on Twitter with our panel during the breaks today. But for the moment, could you just show your thanks to our panel? Thank you very much.